There is healing in this house. Healing in this house. Manifested peace to calm your troubled heart with healing balm. There is healing in this house. There's restoration in this place. There is mercy. There is grace. And though you're heavy laden, come and bring your burdens one by one and leave them here where you belong. There is healing in this house.
When I came into this room, my heart was heavy. I struggled just to make it through the day. But suddenly I felt a holy reverence, and all the pain inside began to slip away. Right away I knew that something happened. I felt it in expressions on each face. And taken by surprise, I felt his presence. That's when I knew that this must be a holy place.
There is healing in this house. Healing in this house. Manifested peace to calm your troubled hearts with healing balm. There is healing in this house. Restoration in this place. There is mercy, there is grace. And though you're heavy laden, come. Bring your burdens one by one and leave them here where they belong. There is healing in this house.
Though you're heavy laden, come.
Bring your burdens one by one.
Leave them there where they belong.
There is healing in this house.
Every head bowed and every eye closed. Lord, how grateful we are for places of healing. We live in a world that's broken, and sometimes along the way we get battered, bruised, and broken ourselves. But how grateful we are for the knowledge of knowing that there is a place where there is healing. There is still a balm in Gilead. There's still a physician there. I pray now that Ricky might die, that Christ might speak. Hide me behind the cross And may the words be heard be the words of him who offers healing. For there is healing in this house. Amen. Welcome to the virtual worship of First Baptist Church West on this, the second Sunday in March, as we're quickly making our way toward Easter. These upcoming weeks, as we're continuing to make our journey through Lent, I trust, pray, and hope that you will plan to be in person in worship, if not with us at First Baptist, at a church of your choosing on Easter Sunday. What a great time to be able to share with other believers, for those of you who are able and capable and willing, to be able to rejoice in what God has done for us in the resurrection of our Savior, Jesus Christ, reminding all of us that the same Spirit that raised Jesus will raise all of them that sleep in him. The death has been robbed of his sting, and the grave no longer has victory. We celebrate that every Sunday, but especially so on Easter Sunday. If you're able to come and share with us, I pray and hope that you'll stay following our morning worship. We'll be our Easter program, and our young people and others will be participating, and we'd love to have you to come and share and see the work that we're doing in this place. Now, there's a word I want to lift today that is found in the Gospel of John. John chapter 6, began reading at verse 1. After this, Jesus crossed the Sea of Galilee, and a huge crowd was following him because they saw the signs that he was performing on the sick. So Jesus went up a mountain and sat down there with his disciples. Now the Passover, a Jewish festival, was near. Therefore, when Jesus looked up and noticed a huge crowd coming toward him, he asked Philip, "Where will we buy bread so that these people can eat?" He asked this to test him, for he himself knew what he was going to do. Philip answered, 200 denarii worth of bread wouldn't be enough for each of them to have a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "There is a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, but what are they among so many?" Then Jesus said, "Have the people to sit down." There was plenty of grass in the place, so they sat down, the men numbering about 5,000. Then Jesus took the loaves, and after giving thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated, so also with the fish, as much as they wanted. When they were full, he told his disciples, "Collect the leftovers so that nothing is wasted." So they collected them and filled 12 baskets with the pieces from the 5 barley loaves that were left over by those who had eaten. When the people saw the sign that he had done, they said, "This really is the prophet who was to come unto the world." Pray with me, if you will, for a little while today on this subject, a gracious act. A gracious act. The story of the feeding of the multitude is included in all 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. However, it is only the Gospel of John that provides clarity as to where the single lunch originated. Only the Gospel of John tells us that there was a boy who was really willing to release what he had and let Jesus use it. Now, that could have been any number of reasons why the boy allowed the disciples to have his lunch. He could have responded to their request out of obedience. Maybe his family had taught him the importance of obeying his elders. Maybe he was instilled with a strong sense of oddness when someone older than him made a request upon him. He felt some obligation to respond. There is something to be said about an obedient spirit, because a haughty spirit can lead to a world of trouble. There's something to be said about persons that do not see obedience as a burden, but a part of one's community responsibility for a civil society. There is something to be said about obedience and what opportunities in life can come our way by simply being obedient. So many of the things that have blessed my life have come from simply demonstrating good manners and showing respect to my elders. And maybe this young lad released his lunch because he respected his elders and he was simply being obedient. However, the lad could have released his lunch because he was curious. Maybe he just wanted to see what would happen if he gave his lunch away. What could Jesus possibly do with one lunch that only had 2 fish and 5 barley loaves with this massive crowd? Was the lunch just for Jesus, or just for another person that may have a need for food more than him? The text makes it clear that the entire group that followed Jesus that day needed food. And the best that the disciples could come up with on their own was the idea to send them away. Philip even raises the question that the lad may have been thinking about when he gave him his lunch. What is this among so many? Curiosity could have caused him to release his lunch. And if so, he would not be the first boy that made a decision about what to do because of curiosity. When Albert Einstein was a young boy, he hardly spoke a word. Many persons, including his family, thought he had a learning disability. And one day his father brought home a compass, and young Albert was so amazed at how the compass worked that no matter what direction he turned the compass, the needle always pointed north. At that moment, curiosity got the best of young Albert because he knew that there were mysteries in the world and he wanted to discover more of them. His entire life was altered because of curiosity, and that curiosity gave us one of the greatest scientists of history. Maybe the boy gave his lunch because he was curious. He just wanted to see what would happen. But I believe the reason the lad gave his lunch was because he was simply being gracious. He gave what he did not have to give to help others. He was just being gracious, giving what he was not obligated to give, but he gives it because he decides to give it. Giving what could not be demanded of him or what could be purchased from him, but giving it because he wanted to do it. He was just being gracious. If there is anything the world needs more today, it is people willing to be more gracious. This nation was built on the premise of grace. Lady Liberty stands in a harbor saying in gracious tones, "Bring me your tired, your weary, and your huddled masses." In the face of Gnosticism, greed, elitism, and just old-fashioned racism, we need to see a witness of grace. In the face of values being determined by where you live and what you have and what you can contribute, we need to see more grace. We need to see more grace that tells us that there is an alternative view of how life can be lived. We need to see more grace that tells us that we're not clogs in the wheels of somebody else's production line. We are children of God, made in His image, with the capacity and the ability to be gracious to others just as God has been gracious to us. What I want for us as a congregation more than anything else as God's people is to be more gracious. I want us to err on the side of doing too much as opposed to trying to measure out how much is needed. I want us to be gracious because when we are gracious, it is when we're acting most like God. Gracious not just to one another and the people like us who might share grace with us, but gracious to those who can do nothing for us in return. Gracious to those who may not see grace at work in their lives and have not seen it at work in their lives until they meet us and we give them a witness of what grace looks like. I want us to be more gracious, because when you are gracious, you create something that only grace can. I want us to be more gracious because grace is what God works with. I want us to be more gracious because had it not been for grace, where would we be? Somebody said, grace woke me up this morning and started me on my way. 3 things happened that day because of Boaz's decision to be gracious, because he decided to give what he did not have to give. What happens because of a gracious act? First, because of a gracious act, the disciples learned that traditional categories cannot comprehend in advance what Jesus can do. When Jesus asked Philip how much it would take to feed the multitude, Philip immediately began to talk in terms of the problem. His entire focus of his attention was on the crowd because he saw the crowd only. He declared there's not enough food, not enough money to take care of all of them. This crowd is just too big. It's simply too many people, and we don't have enough. Jesus, go ahead and send them away. Philip pulled out his calculator, figured that 6 months' wages would only pay enough for them to get a little something. And when we think only in terms of the size of the crowd and the food and the money to meet their need, we're already defeated because we're counting on the same thing that the world counts on. We're counting on our stuff. And God rarely allows us to use our stuff to do his bidding, lest we steal his glory. God causes us to see that even in the face of limitations, that our stuff tells us what we cannot do, but yet God invites us to see what God can do with or without our stuff. Whenever you limit God to doing no more than what you can do with your stuff, you've just made your stuff your God. But I've been black long enough to know that our stuff has not been sufficient. I've been around here long enough to know and seen how God has made stuff last a lot longer than it ought to last. I've seen how God, through his grace, has stretched out and made us be able to get through situation and difficulty time and time again, whether it was a family, whether it was a church, whether it was a business. I know that somebody out there has a testimony about how there's no reason for them to be where they are, given how little they had, unless God opened a door, unless God made a way, unless God demonstrated his grace. Traditional categories cannot comprehend in advance what Jesus can do. When the lad was gracious enough to give his lunch, he helped his disciples to see something that they had not seen before. That when you have Jesus on your side, even with a little bit of stuff, it will be more than enough. But secondly, because of a gracious act, God was willing to take something ordinary and do something extraordinary with it. What makes this story a miracle story is how Jesus takes what is ordinary and does something extraordinary with it. He takes something as simple as a single lunch, the lunch of the poor, 2 small fish, about the size of a couple of sardines, 5 pieces of bread, not a loaf, mind you, but 5 small pieces of bread. And Jesus blesses them and breaks them, and somehow in the process of dividing them, they multiplied. But the miracle starts with the gracious act of the boy who released what he had into the hands of Jesus. Let me share this with you. The whole basis of the American economy is predicated on transactions. And those transactions are based upon you letting go what is in your hand and putting it in somebody else's hand. It only gets better when you let go of it and put it in somebody else's hand. You might put it in somebody else's hand to buy bread, milk, or eggs, or you might put it in somebody else's hands for them to invest for you, to give you a return. You might put it in somebody's hands to help them along the way in life so that they can go to school, get a career, and be able to return to their community to make a difference. But our entire economy is based upon transactions where we let go of what's in our hands and put it in someone else's hands. And newsflash for you: how far it goes and what it does is all predicated on whose hands it's in. I'm an avid golfer and I love to play golf, but you put a golf club in my hand, it don't mean much. But if you take that club out of my hand and put it in Tiger Woods' hands, it'll mean a whole lot, because it's in his hands. Basketball is something I used to love to play when I was young. I was never good at it. I know I would never go to college playing ball. I would never play pro ball. But take that same basketball out of my hand and put it in Michael Jordan's hand and it becomes $1 billion. I'll put it in LeBron James's hands and it becomes record maker. I'll put it in Caitlin Clark's hands and it becomes a woman who opens the door for other women athletes to be cheered and adored. It all depends on whose hands it's in. When we release what we have, no matter how ordinary it may seem, and give it to Jesus, stand back and be prepared to see a miracle. It was nothing short of a miracle in what God has done with us in our own lives. What we have seen, what he can do when we're willing to let go of what's in our hands and put it in his hands. When we turn it over to Jesus, he reminds us that we are his children, and he has promised never to leave us alone. God took the ordinary and did something extraordinary, and to God be the glory. Great things he has done. But family, because of a gracious act, the blessing of what was intended for one became the source of a blessing for many. When the young boy left home early that day to follow Jesus, either he, his mother, or his father, or perhaps his sister, packed a lunch for him. You see, he was subject to being away from home for long periods of time, unsupervised. Thus, they made sure he always had some food. I remember fondly those days of playing in the woods all day and fishing and just having a grand old time. When my grandfather would go off to work, my grandmother would tell the grandchildren going out the house, and we couldn't come back into the house until my grandfather got off work and came back home. They didn't go looking for us, they didn't call for us, but we knew when to show back up, and we just went out in the woods and played all day long, had imaginary friends, and made rabbit boxes and rabbit traps to catch rabbits, and just got in all kind of great mischief and had a wonderful time. This boy was sort of like that. He was accustomed to being unsupervised out on his own. Thus, they made sure he had some food. He might not have had money, but at last he would have something to eat until he could get back home. What was clear was that his lunch was intended for him. What was clear is neither he nor his parents had the needs of others in mind when they packed his lunch. What is clear was that his lunch was for him and him alone. There was not a second sandwich in his lunch bag in case he ran across somebody in need. There was only one. He could have simply eaten his lunch and ignored the needs of the crowd. He could have rejected the request of Philip for his lunch. He could have ignored the curiosity bubbling up in him. He could have turned away from the tug of grace on his heart, but something within him would not permit him to eat his lunch while others were in need. Something within him said, I know you do not have much, but you ought to share what you have and stand back and see what God will do with it. So a lunch made for one became a lunch that served many because of a gracious act. I close with this story about Albert Lexie. Albert Lexie spent 36 years of his life shining shoes. You see, Albert was mentally disabled and had developmental issues. So when he was in high school in a shop, He made a shoe shine stand and then quit school the next year, not finishing his formal education. He started out shining shoes on corners, but he eventually made his way into the Pittsburgh Children's Hospital. For the next 30 plus years, he shined shoes in that hospital. Albert, a shoe shine man who made $3 for every shoe that he shined, provided a gift one day to the Children's Hospital of $200,000. The money was the result of the tips that he had gotten over the years working in the hospital. And Albert said, I want to do something for sick children to make sure that they have what they need. So a Pittsburgh shoe shineman gave $200,000 to a hospital when he didn't make $10,000 a year. And that act of grace saved countless lives. And Albert is celebrated in Pittsburgh this day and is considered one of the greatest philanthropic givers in the entire city from a simple act of grace. And we may not be able to do what Albert did, but all of us can choose to be gracious. As we're moving through this season of Lent, consider what our friends at the Mount Zion Church under the Reverend Cedric Jones are doing now as I talk with him this week. Each day over this Lenten season, he's asking his church and his members to demonstrate an act of giving or an act of hospitality that reflects Christian faith. Being gracious is one of those acts. Go be gracious because God has been gracious to you. Let's pray. O Lord, for grace, how grateful we are. For it indeed is amazing. It was grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieve. Honor your word today because of your grace. And may your grace do for us what we cannot do for ourselves. As we give you the glory, honor, and praise that so rightfully belongs to you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Well, my friends, thank you for joining us in our virtual worship here at First Baptist Church West on this second Sunday in March. Trust, pray, and hope that you've been inspired, blessed, helped, and aided by today's service. I'd love to hear from you. So please write me rwoods@fbcwest.org or call us 704-372-1075. Have a great, wonderful, grace-filled week, and then return that grace to someone else.